Have you ever watched someone laugh at another person's dream, only to come back days later, begging for the chance to buy it? 3 days. That's all it took for one of America's most powerful CEOs to go from mocking a tiny bookstore to offering millions for the building beneath it. It all began on a rainy Tuesday morning. Jack Brooks unlocked the faded wooden door of the smallest bookstore in downtown Boston. The bell above the entrance rang softly, just like it had every morning for the past 15 years. His 9-year-old daughter, Lily, placed a handwritten sign in the window. Every book deserves one more reader. Most people walked past without even looking inside. Some called the store old. Others called it outdated. But it wasn't just a bookstore. It was the last promise he had made to his late wife. A convoy of black luxury SUVs stopped outside. The entire street turned silent. Out stepped Ember Langford, the billionaire CEO who had just purchased almost every building on the block. She walked into the bookstore, looked around for less than 10 seconds, smirked, then laughed. So this. She glanced at the cracked wooden shelves. Is the little bookstore everyone's been talking about? Jack smiled politely. Welcome. Ember looked him up and down before saying the words that made every customer stop browsing. I've seen storage sheds with more value than this place. A few people awkwardly looked away. Lily lowered her eyes. But Jack didn't get angry. He simply closed the book in his hands, looked Ember in the eyes, and quietly replied, Some places aren't valuable because of what you can see. They're valuable because of what time refuses to erase. Ember laughed, turned around, and walked out. She believed she'd never think about that little bookstore again. But exactly 3 days later, she came back. Not with another insult. Not with another business offer. She stood at Jack's door, her hands trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, name your price. Jack looked at the woman who had humiliated him just 3 days earlier, then calmly asked the one question that changed everything. What did you find beneath my bookstore? Rain tapped gently against the old bookstore windows. Jack Brooks unlocked the weathered oak door just as the church clock across the street struck 8. The familiar bell above the entrance chimed. It was the same sound that had welcomed customers every morning for 15 years. Jack smiled. Morning, old friend. Lily giggled. Dad. You talked to the bookstore again. Jack laughed softly. I always do. She slipped her tiny backpack onto one of the reading chairs before running to the children's section. Every morning she arranged the books exactly the same way. Picture books on the lowest shelf. Adventure novels in the middle. Fairy tales beside the window. She believed every book deserved to be seen. Jack never corrected her, because deep down, he believed exactly the same thing. The bookstore wasn't beautiful. The paint had faded years ago. The wooden floor creaked with every step. The sign outside leaned slightly to one side after surviving countless Boston winters. But every shelf, every chair, every scratch in the wooden counter reminded Jack of his late wife, Amelia. Together they had opened Brooks Corner Books 15 years earlier with almost no money. While others chased luxury, they chased stories. When Amelia passed away from cancer 6 years later, Jack made himself one promise. No matter how difficult life became, the bookstore would never close. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was home. At exactly 9:15, the quiet morning changed. One black SUV stopped outside. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the narrow street filled with expensive luxury vehicles. Pedestrians stopped walking. People across the road lifted their phones. Someone whispered, That's Ember Langford. Another replied, The billionaire? What's she doing here? The bookstore suddenly felt very small. The glass door opened. 3 security guards entered first. They quickly inspected every corner. Moments later, Ember Langford walked inside. She wore an elegant cream-colored designer suit. Diamond earrings sparkled beneath perfectly styled dark hair. Her heels echoed across the old wooden floor. She didn't look at the books. She looked at the walls, the ceiling, the windows, like someone inspecting an abandoned warehouse. Jack stepped forward politely. Good morning. Welcome to Brooks Corner Books. Ember offered a brief smile. So this is it? Jack nodded. It is. She slowly walked between the shelves, running one finger across a dusty bookshelf. She looked at the dust on her fingertip, then smiled. I've seen airport gift shops with more customers. A few regular customers lowered their eyes. Nobody laughed. Lily looked toward her father. Jack remained calm. We don't measure success by crowds. Ember chuckled. I noticed. She stopped beside the front window. My company now owns every building on this block. Except this one. Jack nodded. I know. I imagine you've already received my offers. I have. And yet. She looked around once more. You keep refusing. Jack smiled politely. That's correct. Ember folded her arms. Can I ask why? Jack looked around the bookstore. An elderly man quietly reading by the fireplace. A teenage girl studying for her exams. A young mother reading to her son. Then he answered. Because some things aren't for sale. Ember laughed. Everything is for sale. Jack shook his head. No. Everything has a price. But not everything is for sale. For the first time, Ember's smile weakened. She wasn't used to hearing the word no. She walked toward the old counter. Mr. Brooks. I'll make this simple. I'll give you $500,000. The customers gasped. The building wasn't worth half that. Jack didn't even blink. No. Ember raised an eyebrow. 1 million. Jack smiled. No. She leaned closer. 5 million. The bookstore became completely silent. Even Lily stopped turning the pages of her book. Jack looked directly into Ember's eyes. I wouldn't sell this building. For every dollar you own. Silence. Absolute silence. Ember slowly straightened her jacket. She laughed. Not because she found it funny. Because she couldn't believe anyone had just rejected her. She looked around the bookstore one last time. At the cracked shelves. The old furniture. The faded wallpaper. Then she smiled coldly. You know what I see? Jack waited. I see the ugliest building on the most valuable street in Boston. She pointed toward the window. 3 months from now. This entire block will become the city's newest luxury district. Restaurants. Designer stores. 5-star apartments. She looked back at Jack. And right in the middle stands this tiny little bookstore. She shook her head. It doesn't belong here. Lily quietly walked beside her father. She held his hand tightly. Jack gently squeezed hers. Then looked at Ember. Maybe. But this bookstore was here long before your company arrived. And with a little luck, it'll still be here long after people forget your skyscrapers. The words hit harder than Jack intended. Ember's smile disappeared completely. She turned toward the exit. Before leaving, she stopped. Without looking back, she said, You'll regret refusing me. The door closed behind her. The convoy of SUVs disappeared down the street. The bookstore became quiet again. One elderly customer smiled. I think she isn't used to losing. Jack quietly returned the smile. No, I don't think she is. Late that evening, after closing the bookstore, Jack locked the front door. As he reached for the light switch, he heard something. A faint metallic sound. Clink. He frowned. The noise had come from beneath the wooden floor. He stood still. A few seconds later, clink, clink, almost as if someone had dropped metal deep underground. Jack slowly looked down at the old floorboards. The sound stopped. He smiled to himself. It's probably just old pipes. He switched off the lights, took Lily's hand, and walked home. Neither of them noticed. Across the street, inside a parked black sedan, someone had been watching the bookstore for nearly 2 hours. The driver lifted a phone to his ear. His voice was calm. She's right. The pause. Then he looked directly at the bookstore. I think it's underneath the building. The call ended. The sedan quietly pulled away. And at that exact moment, miles across the city, Ember Langford received a thick brown envelope marked Confidential. She opened it. Read the first page. Every trace of confidence vanished from her face. Then she whispered to herself, "No. It can't be this bookstore." Ember Langford read the first page again. Then a third time. The confidential report lay open across the glass table inside her penthouse office. Every word tightened the knot in her stomach. She slowly looked toward the skyline outside her window. "No. This isn't possible." Her assistant, Olivia, stood silently beside her. "What is it, Ms. Langford?" Ember didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid the report across the table. Olivia read only the first paragraph. Her eyes widened. "You mean?" Ember nodded. "If this report is authentic, that bookstore isn't sitting on worthless land. It's sitting on history." The report had been prepared by one of Boston's oldest historical survey firms. During a routine underground scan for Langford Urban Development's new luxury project, their engineers had discovered something unusual beneath the entire city block. Every modern building rested on ordinary concrete foundations. Except one. Brooks Corner Books. Beneath Jack's tiny bookstore, the scanners detected a massive underground stone structure. Older than the city itself. Its walls extended nearly 80 feet below the street. The report ended with one handwritten sentence. "Immediate excavation is recommended before this discovery becomes public." Ember slowly closed the folder. "If the media finds out, the city will freeze every construction permit." Olivia nodded. The entire redevelopment project could stop. "Worse," Ember whispered, "the bookstore becomes protected historical property. And then, we lose everything." Across town, Jack was making breakfast. Lily sat at the kitchen table drawing castles inside one of her coloring books. "Dad. If someone offered you $100 million, would you still keep the bookstore?" Jack smiled. "I would." She looked surprised. "Really?" He placed pancakes onto her plate. "Some things become priceless the moment you realize they can't be replaced." Lily smiled. "Like Mom?" Jack paused, then gently kissed the top of her head. "Exactly like Mom." At Langford headquarters, the board of directors gathered for an emergency meeting. Ember stood before the massive screen. No smile. No confidence. Only urgency. "We have 72 hours. One director frowned. "For what?" "To buy Brooks Corner Books." Another executive laughed. "The owner already refused." "Then make another offer." "How much?" Ember took a deep breath. $10 million. The room fell silent. One director nearly dropped his coffee. "The building isn't worth $500,000. "I know." "Then why?" Ember looked toward the historical survey map. "Because the building isn't what we're buying. We're buying what's underneath it." That afternoon, Jack reopened the bookstore after lunch. Business returned to normal. Children read quietly in the corner. An elderly couple browsed the history section. Lily arranged fresh flowers beside the front window. The familiar sound returned. Clink. Jack looked down. Fin. The noise came from beneath the floorboards. This time, it lasted longer. Clink, clink, clink. One customer looked around. "Did you hear that?" Jack forced a smile. Old buildings make old noises. But even he no longer believed it. Just before closing, the bookstore door opened again. Ember walked inside. This time, she came alone. No security guards. No photographers. No expensive entourage. Only a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. Jack looked up from the counter. "I wasn't expecting to see you again." Ember offered a polite smile. "Neither was I." She glanced around the bookstore. It felt different today. Warmer. Children laughed softly near the reading corner. An old man thanked Jack for recommending a novel. For the first time, she noticed something she had completely ignored during her first visit. Nobody here looked like a customer. They looked like family. Jack closed the book he was repairing. "What can I do for you?" Ember walked to the counter. "I'd like to make another offer." Jack smiled. "I thought we already settled that." "We didn't." She opened the folder. The site. "A purchase agreement. I'll pay $10 million. Every customer inside the bookstore looked up. Lily's eyes grew wide. Jack didn't even look at the contract. My answer hasn't changed. Ember expected resistance. She hadn't expected calm. You didn't even read it. I don't need to. You could retire tomorrow. I'm not trying to retire. She leaned forward. Mr. Brooks. Everyone has a number. Jack smiled. You're wrong. She frowned. No. Everyone has a reason. My reason simply isn't money. For the first time in years, Ember didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever refused $10 million. Nobody. She quietly gathered the papers. Then looked Jack directly in the eyes. I don't understand you. Jack smiled. You don't have to. She turned toward the door. Halfway there, Lily's small voice stopped her. Miss Langford. Ember looked back. Lily held out an old photograph she'd found while cleaning one of the shelves. Is this yours? Ember walked over. She looked at the faded black and white picture. Then froze. The photograph showed the bookstore exactly as it had looked almost 100 years earlier. Standing in front of the building was a young man wearing an engineer's uniform. Beside him, a little girl. On the back of the photograph, written in elegant handwriting, were 7 words. Some promises are buried beneath these floors. Ember's hands began to tremble. She quickly handed the photograph back. Where did you find this? Lily pointed toward the oldest bookshelf. It fell out of one of the history books. Ember stared at the floor beneath her feet. The report, the underground scans, and now this photograph. None of it could be a coincidence. She looked at Jack. For the first time, there was no arrogance left in her voice. Only quiet determination. I'll be back tomorrow. Jack nodded politely. I'll still be here. As Ember walked outside, she pulled out her phone. Only 4 words left her lips. Increase the offer. Immediately. The bookstore door closed behind Ember. For several seconds, she remained standing on the sidewalk. She wasn't looking at the street. She wasn't looking at the skyscrapers her company owned. She was looking at the tiny bookstore. The one building she had mocked just 3 days earlier. Olivia stepped out of the waiting SUV. What now? Ember answered without taking her eyes off the bookstore. I want every historical record ever filed on this property. How far back? To the day it was built. 45 minutes later, Langford Urban Development's private archive room. Dust covered hundreds of old property records. A historian carefully placed an oversized leather ledger onto the table. The building was completed in 1918. Ember slowly turned the pages. Original blueprints. Construction permits. Ownership transfers. Everything looked ordinary. Until one page caught her attention. The original foundation plan. Someone had drawn a second level beneath the basement. It had been crossed out with red ink. At the bottom, one sentence had been handwritten. Lower chambers sealed by federal order. Ember looked up. Federal order? The historian nodded. We've never seen the documents. They disappeared decades ago. Meanwhile, back at Brooks Corner Books, business had returned to normal. Jack was repairing the torn spine of a 70-year-old novel. Lily sat beside him drawing pictures. Dad. If someone wanted our bookstore that badly, doesn't that mean something special is here? Jack smiled. I think what's special is the people who walk through that door. Lily laughed. You always answer like a book. Jack winked. I own one. They both laughed. Neither of them noticed a man across the street taking photographs of the building. Late that evening, the bookstore finally closed. Jack switched off the lights. Again, the strange metallic sound echoed beneath the floor. Clink. This time, it was followed by something new. A deep vibration. Almost like heavy machinery moving far underground. Jack frowned. He walked toward the oldest bookshelf in the store. The vibration stopped. He placed his hand against the wooden floor. Nothing. He shook his head. I'm imagining things. Across town, Ember couldn't sleep. The old blueprint remained spread across her desk. She compared it with the modern survey. They matched perfectly. Except for one thing. The hidden chamber. It shouldn't exist. Yet every scan showed it. She finally picked up the phone. Olivia. Yes, Miss Langford? Call the city archives. I already did. And? They denied access. Ember frowned. Why? They said the property is protected under a federal preservation order. Ember slowly lowered the phone. A bookstore? Under federal protection? None of it made sense. The next morning, Jack unlocked the bookstore as usual. Waiting outside was a man in his 70s. Simple gray jacket. Round glasses. A leather satchel hung over one shoulder. Mr. Brooks. Jack nodded. Yes. My name is Professor Henry Lawson. I'm a historian from Boston University. Jack smiled politely. Can I help you? Henry looked at the building. I believe your bookstore is sitting on one of the most important historical discoveries in American history. Jack laughed softly. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. I wish I had. Henry slowly removed an old black and white photograph from his satchel. It showed the bookstore in 1919. Standing in front of it were dozens of workers. One man stood in the center holding a brass key. Henry pointed toward him. That's my grandfather. Jack looked closer. So, he helped build this bookstore. Jack returned the photograph. That's wonderful. Henry looked directly into Jack's eyes. He also helped seal whatever exists beneath it. Jack's smile disappeared. What? Henry lowered his voice. My grandfather left me one instruction before he died. If anyone ever tries to buy that bookstore, don't let them. Before Jack could respond, 3 black SUVs stopped outside once again. This time, there were no security guards. Only Ember. She stepped out carrying a single envelope. She walked into the bookstore. No arrogance. No smile. No confidence. She stopped in front of Jack. Then quietly placed the envelope on the counter. Jack opened it. His eyes widened. Inside was a certified purchase agreement. Offer, $50 million. The entire bookstore fell silent. Even Professor Lawson stared in disbelief. Jack slowly looked up. You can't be serious. Ember's voice trembled for the first time. I've never been more serious in my life. Jack closed the envelope. My answer is still no. Ember took a deep breath. Then said something she never imagined she'd say to anyone. Please. I'm begging you. Jack looked at the woman who had humiliated him 3 days earlier. Then calmly asked, tell me the truth. Why is this building worth $50 million to you? Ember closed her eyes. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. When she finally did, only one sentence came out. Because if I don't buy it before tomorrow morning, someone else will. The bookstore fell silent. No one spoke. The $50 million contract remained on the wooden counter between Jack and Ember. Jack looked from the contract to Ember, then quietly pushed it back toward her. My answer is still no. Ember closed her eyes. You don't understand. Jack remained calm. Then help me understand. Before Ember could answer, Professor Henry Lawson suddenly spoke. Don't tell him here. Everyone turned. Henry looked toward the bookstore windows. They're already watching. Jack frowned. Who's watching? Henry slowly pointed across the street. A black SUV sat parked beneath a maple tree. Its windows were completely tinted. As if on cue, the SUV pulled away. Henry sighed. They know. Jack locked the bookstore. He flipped the sign on the front door. Close. Only 4 people remained inside. Lily, Ember, Professor Lawson. Henry carefully placed the original blueprint across the reading table. You deserve the truth. He pointed to the faded drawings. This bookstore was never designed to sell books. Jack frowned. What do you mean? It was built after World War I. To protect something far more valuable. Lily whispered. A treasure? Henry smiled. No. A library. Everyone looked confused. Henry continued. In 1918, Europe was losing priceless handwritten books, historical maps, and original American documents. A group of historians secretly moved hundreds of irreplaceable manuscripts to Boston. They built this bookstore above the underground archive, so no one would ever suspect what was beneath it. Jack stared at the blueprint. So, there's really a hidden room? Henry nodded. A massive underground library. Ember finally spoke. My company's underground scans found it 3 days ago. Jack looked at her. So that's why you wanted the building? She slowly nodded. If the discovery became public, the city would immediately declare this entire block a National Historic Landmark. Jack frowned. So, my redevelopment project would be permanently cancelled. Silence filled the room. Jack finally understood. You weren't buying the bookstore. You were trying to control what happened after the discovery. Ember lowered her eyes. Yes. Lily quietly raised her hand. Dad, if there's really a library, where's the door? Henry smiled. My grandfather told me only one thing. It could only be opened by the building's rightful owner. Jack laughed softly. I've owned this place for 15 years. Henry looked at him. No. Your family has. Jack looked confused. What? Henry pulled a yellow document from his satchel. This bookstore was sold to your grandfather in 1958. He promised the historians that no corporation would ever own this building. Jack slowly unfolded the document. His grandfather's signature covered the bottom of the page. His eyes filled with emotion. So that's why Grandpa never wanted to sell. Henry quietly nodded. He wasn't protecting a business. He was protecting history. Just then, Lily pointed toward the fireplace. Dad. The floor moved. Everyone looked. One of the old wooden floorboards had shifted slightly. Henry smiled. My grandfather said curious children would find the entrance one day. Jack carefully knelt beside the fireplace. He lifted the loose board. Underneath, a small brass key rested inside, wrapped in faded cloth. Jack picked it up. The key was surprisingly heavy. Henry pointed toward the oldest bookshelf. Try there. Jack inserted the key into a tiny lock hidden behind hundreds of old books. Click. The entire bookshelf trembled. Slowly, it swung outward. Cold air rushed from below. A stone staircase disappeared into darkness. Lily gasped. It's real. Flashlights illuminated the underground chamber. Rows upon rows of wooden shelves stretched into the distance. Thousands of perfectly preserved books. Original handwritten journals. Historic maps. Letters signed by America's founding fathers. First editions that historians believed had been destroyed forever. Ember stood speechless. Tears formed in her eyes. I almost destroyed all of this. Henry quietly replied. But you didn't. She looked at Jack. No. You stopped me. Several weeks later, the discovery became international news. Brooks Corner Books was officially declared a National Historic Landmark. The hidden library became one of America's greatest historical discoveries. Jack remained the legal owner and was appointed the library's first public curator. The city canceled every demolition permit on the block. Instead, the neighborhood became a cultural district centered around the bookstore. Ember held a press conference. Hundreds of reporters waited. She stepped to the microphone. 3 days earlier, she had mocked the little bookstore. Today, she told the world the truth. I judged a place by its appearance. I measured its value in dollars. I was wrong. She paused. Some places remind us that history is worth more than profit. Then she surprised everyone. My company will personally fund the restoration of Brooks Corner Books. With no ownership stake. The reporters erupted with questions. She answered only one. Why? Ember smiled. Because not everything valuable should belong to the highest bidder. 6 months later, children once again filled the bookstore. Visitors traveled from around the world. Lily proudly gave tours of the hidden library. Jack stood near the entrance, watching families discover stories that had been hidden for more than a century. Ember walked through the front door carrying a small box. I brought something. Jack smiled. What is it? She opened the box. Inside hung a beautifully carved wooden sign. She handed it to Jack. Brooks Corner Books, where stories find their forever home. Jack smiled. I think my wife would have loved it. Ember looked around the bookstore. So do I. As the new sign was hung above the entrance, the little bookstore everyone wanted to tear down became the place the entire country came to protect.